Ópera apresenta ExpoGestão.
Obrigado. Let's start with a really important question. It's great to be here. I arrived on Sunday in Rio de Janeiro, spent some time with customers, and what I'm finding everywhere, whether it's here, whether it's in the 60 countries I've traveled over the last 2 years, everyone is trying to understand and come up with an answer to this question. What does it really mean to be a leader today? When I started my career, the world was a simpler place. We had a model of leadership that was very clear. We had 1 or 2 leaders at the top of the organization who knew their industry really well, who created the strategy, and the rest of us just did our jobs day in and day out. And that model was successful for a very long time. It still exists in some organizations. But in today's world, as you've been seeing in this conference, with the future of work, with digital disruption, with all the changes that are happening, which seems to be all at the same time, organizations are understanding that it's no longer enough to have 1 or 2 leaders at the top of the organization that are strong. We need to have strength at every level, in every position, throughout our companies, whether they're small companies or big companies. But at a time when we need leaders to be stronger than ever, we look around our world and we realize that they're not. We have leaders embroiled in corruption, scandal, behaving badly, and we're really saying, is that what good leadership is about? Does everyone remember this day? This was March in 2016. I arrived in Sao Paulo on a Sunday morning, bright and early from Toronto. I'm Canadian. And as I arrived, I was in my taxi cab on my way to the hotel, and I texted my colleague, and I said, just wanted you to know I've arrived. I'll see you tonight for dinner. And she immediately replied saying, oh, great, but just so that you know, your trip to your hotel is going to take a long time because of the protests. And I said, okay, I didn't know what that was. So I immediately Googled Sao Paulo protest, and I learned about what was unfolding in the major cities in this country. And I was there that week to talk about leadership. How lucky was I? That's all every Brazilian wanted to talk about. Whether I was talking to a taxi cab driver, a person at my hotel, the person at a restaurant, this was the topic. And you know what happens personally when your senior leaders do not live up to the expectations of leadership? Is this what it means to be a leader today? No. But we have to answer this question ourselves. At a personal level, you need to have an answer for your own leadership role. And I'm going to make this presentation interactive. So I'm going to ask for the lights to come up for a minute. And what's going to happen is you're going to turn to your left or turn to your right, find a partner in front of you or behind you, and you're going to take 1 minute, introduce yourselves if you haven't, and answer this question for yourself. What does it mean for you to be a leader today? And here's your challenge. I know it's been a long day. You have to answer this question using one word. What's the one word for you that best answers this question? Are you clear? Are you ready? Find your partner, and you've got 1 minute to have a conversation. Go. Okay, begin to wind down the discussion. Now, if we were a smaller group, I would go around and hear some of your words. We do a one-day program based on the ideas that you're going to hear about today on the leadership contract. So imagine there's a classroom with about 20 leaders, and the facilitator introduces this activity and then asks the leaders, okay, give us your words. And they write down on the flip chart all the words. And the words we typically get is, we need leaders to be inspirational. Did anyone say inspirational? Hands come up. We need leaders to have courage. We need leaders to be strategic. We need leaders to be customer-focused. We need leaders to be coaches. We need leaders to drive change. We need leaders to be collaborative. And the list goes on. And in the first round, about 20 words come on the flip chart. And then the facilitator says, okay, now as we do this whole day, as you come up with new ideas, new words, go to the flip chart and write them down. By the end of the day, that list of 20 words grows to 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80 different words, all answering the question, what does it mean to be a leader today? And it doesn't matter where we do it in the world, the same thing happens. And I look at that list all the time and I go, wow, being a leader is a big job today. The expectations are significant. What's also interesting is that list of words, the words you've just discussed, aren't just for CEOs. Those expectations aren't just for senior executives. They're for everybody in a leadership role, whether you're a supervisor, a team leader, a frontline manager, a middle manager, a director, or in the executive ranks. The expectations are the same today. And then I look at that list and I go, can I be that kind of leader every single day, Monday to Friday, consistently? That's the personal challenge we all face. I actually had to ask myself this question very early in my career. The very first job I had after I graduated from university, I started working with a large organization. And it did really, really important work. It helped some of our neediest people in our society try to have a better life. We helped them with education, retraining, career counseling. The work was really important. But when I joined the organization, I looked at the environment, and it was really boring. Everybody showed up every single day like zombies. Just no life, no energy, no passion. And there I was, 22 years old, being so excited to start in the world of work. And I said, is this what it's going to be like? Really? And I have to show up now for 40 years and be a loyal employee and then maybe retire with a pension? Is that what the world of work is going to be like? I knew back then I wanted something to be different. But the culture was really not great. But the work was meaningful, so I was able to move on. Until one day, a senior manager named Zinta approached me and said, you know, Vince, you're doing some really interesting things with your customers, but I think you want to have more impact on this organization. I didn't even know how she knew that about me. And so we started a small committee trying to change the culture of the environment, and all of a sudden I began to see that small changes started to have an impact. And I realized the power of one strong leader and the power that she had on me and the organization. Now I was feeling good, like, wow, this is good. I can see being here for a period of time. And then disaster struck. My colleague, Zinta, was diagnosed with lung cancer. And she left immediately to start her treatments. And I was devastated, as many of my coworkers were. But when she left, everything started to turn back, ever so slowly. The change could not sustain itself without her pushing. I heard over several months that she wasn't doing well, and I went to visit her in her house because she was so important to me. And in that visit, she shared with me a world I was not aware of, her experience as a senior manager in that organization. I began to understand why the culture was not good, because it was toxic for the managers. They were always fighting against each other, sabotaging each other, lack of trust. It was so stressful for her that she said to me, you know, Vince, I believe the disease I'm fighting today is a result of spending my career in this organization. Because I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, I have no history of lung cancer in my family, and I'm convinced the disease I'm fighting is a result of this. Those ideas completely shattered how I thought about that organization. And 2 weeks after that visit, she wrote me a letter to challenge me, to say, what are you going to do in your life, in your career? It's a letter I've kept since I was 22. And then 2 weeks after I got that letter, she passed away, and the organization died with her. I knew there was no chance because the other senior leaders didn't care about the employees, didn't want to create a great culture. And so when I think about what it means to be a leader, I think about Zinta and her passion for young people and her passion for growing and developing a great culture. But in today's world, we've got to think about leadership a little bit more broadly. And I think about the environment that we're in, the context, the strategy that you're trying to implement, and the leadership. These are really connected today. Our environment, as we're going to see in a minute, is changing more than ever before. You know it. You're living that in your own leadership roles. And we're trying to figure out what's the business strategy that we need to put in place that's going to be successful. But then we also need to understand what's the kind of leadership that we need in our companies in order to execute that strategy. And many companies struggle with the execution of their strategy. And here's probably the reason why. KPMG did a survey of CEOs. They do an annual survey of CEOs. And what they found was 72% of them said that the next 3 years will have more change in their industry than the previous 50 years. That's a dramatic statement for a senior leader to make. And that 42% of them said that in order to be successful, we needed to transform our organizations. The executive board of the U.S. Said 86% of senior leaders say that the pace of change is more dramatic now than it's ever been. You know that. And 62% said more and more, I'm finding myself in new or situations I have never encountered before. How do you lead in that kind of ambiguity? And McKinsey looked at what makes transformation successful, and they have found that 63% of the CEOs they interviewed said it has a big impact on the leaders. The leaders have to acquire new mindsets and new capabilities, new ways of thinking about their roles in ways that they've never had to before. And so we find a lot of companies in what is called an inflection point. Andrew Grove, when he came up with this idea, was the CEO of Intel in the US. And he said an inflection point is a critical part in the life of a business where all your fundamentals are changing. And how you respond is important. You either find the way to grow and find new paths to grow, or it marks the beginning of the end, as is signaled by the red line going down, and you have no chance. Think about what's happening in the retail sector. Think about the large companies that have existed for years that are not able to keep up with all the changes happening in that sector. This is the real challenge we face today. We're at inflection points. And here's what it feels like to be a leader at an inflection point. Have a look at these leaders. They go back to 1990, and they produce music CDs. Let's see how they respond to the challenges happening in their sector. We don't have audio for the video. Can I go back? Sorry, it worked earlier. Let's try it again.
CD sales are down. We're getting killed by this internet fad.
How about a music club? 10 CDs for $1.
We should invest in laser discs.
What if we didn't have to sell CDs? If the market trend is to shift online, We should create an online platform and charge monthly subscription fees.
How is that going to help us sell CDs?
Are you on the right side of change? Ask a CPA, Chartered Professional Accountants.
He could not think about his business in any different way. And yet, how many times do we hear the example where the answer was in the room? Someone had the answer. Blockbuster could have acquired Netflix, but they couldn't think differently about their business. So what happens when an organization is at an inflection point? What's the impact that it has on leaders? Well, the first is there's new expectations of leaders, because the way you behaved in the past isn't going to be what you need to do in the future. That you're dealing with more complexity. You almost have two companies, the company that you created and the new company you're trying to transform. That some leaders struggle because they may not believe in the future direction of the company. And as our clients say, what I work with, we need leaders who can shift their mindset and jump to the new level of growth. Easier said than done. So what do we hear that our clients say, what do we need from leaders today? We need leaders who can lead change and transformation. We need leaders who are committed to leaving our company in a strong place. We need leaders who have the courage to do some of the difficult things that hold us back. And we need leaders who can create strong cultures. But at a time when we need leaders to be stronger than they've ever been, the research and our client work around the world shows that they're not. This is where the complaints we hear over and over and over again. Leaders who are not excited about the future. Leaders who kind of live in silos and can't work and collaborate. Leaders who accept mediocrity in themselves. And there's more there for you to kind of look at. This is the challenge. So what's the way forward? Well, what I've been thinking about for a long time is what's missing is this idea of leadership accountability. If you look around the world and see leaders who've behaved badly, embroiled in scandal or corruption, or not helping their companies be successful, they have forgotten this connection between accountability and leadership that has always existed. John Gardner was an American writer on leadership, and in 1990 he wrote a book called On Leadership, and he said, accountability and leadership are deeply connected, and those individuals who are granted power must be held accountable, right? That's really critical. But this lack of accountability plays out in very, very subtle ways in organizations every single day. And I'm going to show you this video clip that kind of makes fun of that. It's a Canadian one, a client of mine out of Toronto. And let's see how they do. They've got a fundamental challenge that they have to face, and let's see how they handle this situation. So let's see how they do.
This is a big problem we have here.
It sure is.
Yes, it is.
Big problem.
Competition is killing us.
That's true.
Very much so, yes.
They really are.
We need a new strategy.
We sure do.
Strategy will be good.
Totally agree.
I need new people.
Yes, you do.
New people.
Definitely.
Here's the plan.
New people.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the solution right there. New people.
So what's the chance of this company being successful? You don't need to meet with the CEO. You don't need to read their annual report. You don't need to talk to an analyst to see how the company is going to fare in the market. Just by looking at these leaders, you can say they don't have a chance. Right? Now, they're nice people. They're Canadians. Canadians are really nice. We're nice people. But as leaders, they're not being accountable. And this is the challenge that we're finding globally. And this is based on research that we've done. This report is also available from our Brazilian team. It's been translated into Portuguese if you're interested, so you can get it on our website. And what we were interested in trying to do is to say, what's kind of the issue of leadership accountability that organizations are struggling with? Because we were seeing it, and I was seeing it in all the companies we were talking to. And so we did a study of over 2,000 senior leaders. A third of the sample were C-suite leaders, so CEO, COO, CFO types, many of you in the room. Another third were senior HR leaders, heads of human resources. And another third were director level and other executives in companies. Over 20 sectors around the world. And what we found was unbelievable parallels globally, which surprised me. 72%, 3 out of the 4 companies we surveyed said leadership accountability is a critical business issue in our company, but we're not talking about it. And when we asked, well, how satisfied are you with your current ability of leaders to be accountable, only 31%. That's the gap. And it doesn't matter if we collected the data in South America and Latin America, in North America, in Europe, in Asia, and now most recently in Australia and New Zealand. It's the same story everywhere, this gap in leadership accountability. We were really curious to understand, I wonder if there's a connection between strong leadership accountability and company performance. My sense was there would be. I was surprised at how strong the connection is. So we asked the companies who did the survey to say, identify your performance over the last 3 years. Are you an industry leader, top 25%? Are you above average, average, below average, or in the bottom quartile, the bottom 25%? What was really, really interesting when we analyzed the research was that above average performing companies and average performing companies look more like poor performing companies than they do like industry leaders. So we kept the data with the industry leaders together and added everyone together. So as you can see, the top line asks, is leadership accountability critical? Well, of course, everyone says it's critical. How satisfied are you with the degree of accountability? In the industry-leading companies, over 2 times greater satisfaction than the poor-performing companies. Have you set clear expectations of your leaders? Again, industry-leading companies do this 2 times more than poor-performing companies. And do you have leaders who are fully committed to their roles? Again, a big shift in industry-leading companies. Now, when we cut the data for Brazil, we saw pretty much the same pattern. Everyone believes leadership accountability is critical, but look at the satisfaction, right? 300% greater satisfaction among the industry-leading companies than in the average and poor-performing companies. They've done a better job of communicating leadership expectations, and we don't see as big of a difference in leaders being committed, but a difference is still there. Now, what we also wanted to understand is what did those accountable leaders do in those industry-leading companies day to day? What were the behaviors they demonstrated? And that was the question. Think of the leaders in your company who are truly accountable, and what do they do differently every day? Globally, the list that emerges is the one that is on your right. Number 1, they set everyone in their companies to high standards of performance and behavior. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, just a couple of weeks ago, wrote his annual letter to shareholders. And this was the thing he talked about, that they are unrelenting at Amazon of setting high standards for everybody. You can see how it translates into their performance. 2, that the leaders have the courage to tackle tough issues and make difficult decisions. That they're very good at communicating the strategy to everyone in the organization. That they express optimism about the future and its company. And 3, they're always looking out, anticipating what's happening in their environment. They're not so busy with their head down trying to get everything done. They take time to pause and look outside. An interesting list of behaviors. These are their lists you can do, and many of you might be doing it. What about in Brazil? So what we see is 3 of the behaviors are the same as the global list, just the order changes. The first one is interesting, right? Expressing optimism about the company and its future. And when we talk to our customers about this, they said this makes perfect sense given what's been happening in your country and the need for leaders to really inspire hope of their employees, and optimism makes perfect sense. What's different? Number 3 is creating kind of leadership competencies for leaders and developing them. and you can kind of read the last one there. So again, similarity, subtle differences, but we're starting to understand what it is that accountable leaders do every day. Now, what do organizations do to build strong leadership accountability? Well, again, we saw 5 practices that emerge. The first, globally, is that they make sure that leaders understand what's important to customers. The voice of the customer is always critical there. That they've defined clear expectations of their leaders. That they help bring strategic clarity to leaders so they can communicate that to employees. That they've created diversity among the leader pool, so it's not the leader mimicking the CEO, that there's diversity, women, age, all kinds of diversity in the pool. And that they've really kind of been clear on setting expectations of leaders. And you can have a look at the list on your right from Brazil. Implementing programs to develop leaders, supporting their development, really helping understand the voice of the customer, like the global list, and you can see the other 2 there. This idea of setting expectations is becoming critical and more important. So what I want you to do now is go back to your partner. I'm going to ask for the lights to come back on. And again, just take 1 or 2 minutes to talk about what do you take away from this research? What surprised you? What's interesting? What maybe has confirmed your own experience as a senior leader in your organization? Okay, go back to your partner just for a minute. Go. Perfect. Okay, begin to wind down the conversation. Thank you for doing that. You may have questions that we can address afterwards. So now the question is, given how strong this research suggests is the challenge with leadership accountability, what's the way forward? I didn't come here all this way to depress you at the end of the day. What's the way forward? And that's really what we've been working with our clients about. And it begins with this shift in mindset really around what it means to be a leader. And as I thought about it, to me, what really became important when I thought about what's missing, because I've spent my whole career in the leadership area. I've done it through my research. I've worked, as a leader at all levels. I've been in 3 startups. I've worked through 12 integrations. I've been part of privately held companies, publicly traded companies. I've kind of seen it all. And I've consulted with hundreds of organizations. What's missing? And as I thought about it, I thought this idea of a contract is what's missing. Because I believe as human beings everywhere, we hold anyone we deem to be a leader to a higher standard of behavior. It doesn't matter if that person is the leader of a country, a prime minister or a president, whether that person's a CEO, an executive, a middle manager, a frontline leader, whether that person's a leader in the community, a religious leader, it doesn't matter what the leadership role is. As humans, we think leader, we expect more. And we have to. It's why when leaders behave badly and they're embroiled in scandal, why we get so upset. Why we get so disillusioned. Because no, you were a leader. You were leading our country, you were leading our company, and you let us down. To me, that implies a contract. When you take on a leadership role at any level, you've signed up for something really, really important. The problem is, we have not been deliberate at helping people understand this contract. Why? Because when I ask people, how did you get into a leadership role? It's surprising how many people say, I was really good at something. I was like the best engineer. I was the best salesperson. I was the best accountant, the best analyst, the best teacher, the best whatever. When you are really strong at something technical, companies have had a history of putting that person in a leadership role. And then once you're in the role, you kind of say, well, I feel good. I like the title. It usually pays more money. Makes logical sense. And maybe a generation ago, that was okay. Because the world was simpler. The model of leadership is simpler. But today, when we need leaders to be strong at every level, I don't think that's the way forward. So we have to, what I think we've done, instead of thinking about this as a contract that we have to sign, I think what we've done is thought about it like an online contract. You know, when you're online conducting any kind of transaction, at some point in time, this window comes up with the terms and conditions. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm working hard and trying to get a lot of things done, when the window pops up, what does Vince do? I immediately scroll to the bottom, I click agree, and I move on with my day. I know I'm bound to something. I'm not quite sure what it is. My biggest fear in the back of my mind is one day Apple or Amazon comes to my front door and takes away my 3 kids because I've missed something in the contract. And this is what we have to think about. Many of us have clicked agree for leadership roles, understandably, but we can't do that anymore. There's too much riding on it. And so in the book, The Leadership Contract, I say, A, there is a contract, you need to understand that, and B, that it comes with 4 terms and conditions, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about each of those. The first is that leadership is a decision, and you have to make it. A number of years ago, I was delivering a leadership program with a colleague, with the senior leaders of a company. And I hadn't even started thinking about this idea of the contract and the decision. And this was a great program. We were debating all these topics about leadership. And one individual asked me, Vince, ultimately, what do you think leadership is? And I said, well, you know, I'm thinking about this, and I think it starts with the decision. You've got to make this deliberate decision. And as I started to say that, one of the participants in an angry tone just said, I never got to make that decision. Now imagine if one of you did that right now, in front of everybody, we would all be pretty curious. Why did you react this way? So I asked, what's going on? Why did you react this way? His name was Earl, and he talked about his career. He was an engineer by training, and he loved to be an engineer. In fact, he was the best engineer. Guess what happened? One day, his manager came to him and said, you're such a great engineer, we want to promote you now as a team lead. They gave him a small team, and off he went. No support, no development. He said, I didn't even get a binder. I didn't know what I was doing. And then he said every 3 or 4 years, another role would present itself, a promotion, a bigger leadership job, more pay and compensation, a better title, and I just accepted it. I thought is what I was asked to do. He clicked agree. And he said, here I am now as the vice president of construction services for my company. And you know what? I actually think of myself still as an engineer first and leadership as my part-time job. And when he said that, The whole room went absolutely silent. And when you do the work that my colleagues and I do, and that happens in a room, you know what he just said? Everyone could relate to and everyone experienced. And when he said that, I said, that's what it is. We have people in leadership roles who don't even think of themselves as leaders. He was honest. He said, yeah, I would show up every day thinking of myself as an engineer. It's why I micromanaged my team. I wanted to find out the projects they were working on because that's what I enjoyed. Oh yeah, that leadership stuff, I'll get to it Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 2:30. So the shift we have to make, the mindset shift, is to say if you are in a leadership role, you have to define yourself through that role. You have to define yourself as a leader or you won't be successful. It doesn't diminish the technical expertise you have. But if you're in a leadership role, that's how you have to define yourself. And that's what I call a big D decision. Moments in your career where you'll be asked to take on a leadership role, and you may be really motivated to click agree, but you got to pause and think about, am I clear about what I'm signing up for? Am I prepared to do what's necessary? Am I fully committed to define myself as a leader? That's the big D decision. But as leaders, we get tested every single day in very subtle ways as well. And those are almost small D decisions where we have to pay attention to. Let me give you an example. Has anyone had a really, really, really difficult week at work ever? Nobody? Just me? Right? It's a week where everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Problem after problem, crisis after crisis. Remember that week? Remember that week. Now, it's Friday morning, and you're feeling kind of tired, right? Sure, you've had a tough week, and you're just trying to get through your day, and you're hoping for the day to come to an end because you've got plans with your family. You're going to go to the beach, have a great time. That's what's getting you through. And you've got one more meeting on Friday afternoon. And there you are with your colleagues. And you're kind of tired, so you're paying attention, you're not paying attention. You know what that's like. Now, something happens in the meeting where all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not good. Maybe there's a decision being made that you disagree with. Sorry. It's not in the best interest of the company or your customers. And then you just take a deep breath. Okay, what am I going to do? And now you have what I call a meeting within a meeting. You're in a meeting, but now you're having a meeting with yourself inside your own head. No one else knows about it. And you're debating, do I intervene and create some conflict because I disagree with this issue, or do I let it go? It's an internal struggle that you have, that we all have. So now you convince yourself, okay, I'm going to let it go. Not a big deal. And the meeting ends up, and you don't even think about it, but next week you show up at work, and you find yourself in 2 or 3 of these very, very subtle moments that don't seem important, but your leadership is tested as well. So as leaders, we definitely have to pay attention to those big D moments, but we also have to be deliberate in paying attention to those small D moments. So I write a weekly blog called The Gut Check for Leaders. It's always framed in the form of a question to try to stimulate reflection. And the question I want you to think about is, are you fully committed to your role as a leader? Defining yourself in the leadership role that you have with your company. It's the first term of the leadership contract, and you can't have accountability without it. Next, leadership is an obligation, and you have to step up to those. See, a lot of leaders fail to appreciate that once you take on a leadership role, we expect a lot from you. You have an obligation to a number of stakeholders, your customers, your employees, stakeholders and shareholders, the communities in which you do business. You have an obligation to yourself to engage in development, to take care of your health so you can lead. But a lot of leaders do not have any clarity about what their primary obligation is. This is when we have our one-day program, the hardest part of the day for people. when you ask them, so what's your primary obligation as a leader? Few provide an answer because we've never expected this of leaders. One leader who spent a lot of time thinking about this is Sam Palmisano, and he was the CEO of IBM for an 11-year period. And when he was in that company during that 11 years, his legacy was unbelievable growth, and he left a legacy of investing in developing leaders like no other CEO before him. Near the end of his term at IBM, he was interviewed to think about what was his perspective on his leadership role, and how did he think about the core principles and his obligation. Look at what he has to say, because I think his message doesn't just apply for a CEO of Fortune 50 company. I think it applies to all of us. Let's hear what he has to say.
What if if you could talk about that, your principles of leadership?
The most important thing that I can do is to prepare the company and its people for the future and leave it in better shape than I found it. To me, that is the number one important thing. Now, people will say you should measure yourself on stock price, and there's nothing to be defensive about. Our stock's at a 100-year high, or your earnings. Well, our earnings are a 100-year high. So there's nothing to be defensive about. I just think that's a material element of performance. You know, it's a quantitative element, performance. But the more sustainable one, the more lasting one is what did you leave behind? And is IBM better for the 10 years or 11 years I've spent as CEO than it was before I got there? That is the measure. I think if you look at history and people look back in time, that's how a leader should be judged. Did you leave it in better shape than you found it?
Isn't that a great line? You see, sometimes we don't really appreciate day to day that we're having an impact and that we're leaving a legacy. I sometimes get asked to work with a CEO when they're kind of near the end of their career, and they want to now kind of have another year or two where they want to leave a legacy. And I say to them, but you know, you were leaving a legacy every other single day you were in your role. You don't need to do it and leave that till the end. The most important message here is that we're all going to be measured. And if you think about those leaders who are not accountable, who have behaved badly, they have not left their countries, their companies, their cities, their communities in better shape than they found it. So let's go 10 years in the future. And you and I may bump in each other. We're walking through this city. And you say to me, hey, I remember you talking about this idea of leadership obligation. And you know what I would say? I would say, that's great. So tell me, in the last 10 years, how have you left your company in better shape? What is the tangible evidence of the lasting impact you've had? I know it's a big idea, and for many leaders, it's not one that they think about. But we have to think about this, because this is how you're going to be measured. Did you leave things better for customers? Did you leave things better for the employees? Did you leave things better for shareholders and other stakeholders? That's how we have to think about our role. That's what we're accountable to as leaders. What's next? The third term says, leadership is hard work, and we have to get tough. What is this about? Well, as you know, it's not an easy job. It's not for everybody. But the role demands us to step up and do challenging things. But what we hear over and over again from our clients all over the world is leaders struggle doing many of these challenging things, particularly as it relates to people. What are the frustrations? We don't give candid feedback to the people we lead. We don't manage a chronic poor performer aggressively enough. If we're having conflict with a peer, we're afraid to have that conversation. We hear this over and over again. And what we don't appreciate every single day is what I call and write about the hard rule of leadership, which essentially says that if you avoid some of this hard work as a leader, you don't realize how it weakens you, weakens your team, and ultimately weakens your company. But if you have the courage to tackle this difficult work, you make yourself stronger, you make your team stronger, and you make your company stronger. I can't tell you how many companies I work with when I present this slide and the leaders say, we are right here. We all know there are one or two big challenges that we're facing, but nobody wants to talk about it. We can't seem to get in a room and have this conversation. And you know what's important? We can't get defensive about this. I do it, you do it. I have a list of things that I know I'm avoiding. There's a conversation I need to have with a colleague in the United States. Our teams aren't getting along. But Vince is really good at coming up with excuses. Oh, I'm traveling this week in Brazil. I'll wait until I'm back in Canada. But you know what? Maybe I shouldn't do this over the phone. Maybe we'll wait until July or August when I'm meeting him face to face and we'll talk. Yeah, that's what I'll do. What am I doing? I'm making excuses. But I don't appreciate the time that I lose making myself, my relationship with him, and our teams weaker. There's a great quote here. Hard work really is about the character of a person. In the face of it, are you one who's going to roll up their sleeves? Let's go. Let's get it done. Are you going to stand back and say, oh, it's not for me to do. I'm a vice president. Someone else should do this. Or maybe HR should manage my poor performer, not me. Or do you not show up at all? We all know leaders who avoid some of this hard work. It's really about your character as a person. So what hard work are you avoiding? I would guarantee that every leader in this room has a relationship that needs to be repaired, has a conflict that you're not addressing, has feedback that you need to deliver to someone, but you're making excuses and you're not finding a way to do it. And it may not be tangible, but you are paying a price for it. And so is your company. And we all do it. We've got to get better at tackling this. Finally, leadership is a community. What is this about? Well, it's really recognizing that there is a new model of leadership. I described to you when I started working, this was the model. It was a hierarchy. The one or two leaders at the top, the rest of us in our own little silos and departments. We rarely talk to each other. We rarely even work together. But in today's world, where you have agile teams, where you have global matrix structures, where you have small companies where employees come together to bring different areas of expertise to create new products and new solutions for customers, this is how we're working. The corporate executive board has surveyed leaders, and 67% of them say that the amount of collaboration they're doing today is greater than it's ever been. And over 50% of them say that my success is based on someone else. It's no longer about what I do or what my team does independently. I can't be successful unless I'm working well with colleagues across the organization. And so when you start thinking about leaders working like this, what starts to become more important is this idea of a leadership culture. That we have to start thinking about what's the culture we create in our organization that really helps leaders be effective at working together. And as you know with culture, if we're not deliberate at defining the type of culture that we have and need, we're going to get something by accident. So here's a culture that can happen in an organization. I call this the culture of zombies. This is what I joined early in my career. Does everybody watch The Walking Dead and the zombie movies? Imagine a culture like this. Every day, people going through the motions. No energy, no passion, no life, no vitality. And if you are an accountable leader, You have to be afraid, like this woman. You have to run and run fast, because we've all seen the zombie movies. Once you are bitten by a zombie, there is no cure. And this is what happens if you work in this environment. When I joined this organization, early in my career, at 10:30 in the morning and 2:30 in the afternoon every day, something happened when you were working in the office. We had a big open area, everybody had their desks, and you were working away, and then in distance, you would hear a bell ring. And when I first started, it was remarkable to see what happened. As soon as the bell would ring, everybody would stop what they were doing, would open the drawer of their desk, pull out a purse or a wallet, and they would walk in single file, like zombies, to the sound of the bell. What was the bell? Well, it was a cart that came up the office tower where people would buy for their break a coffee or some kind of pastry. And they would buy their coffee and their pastry, walk back to their desk, and sit there for 15 minutes just having their coffee. They were zombies. And I remember being a young employee going, this is really strange. It's really strange behavior. Now, fast forward about 9 months. Here I am now, just under a year in this organization. I'm working away one morning, and guess what? The bell rings. All of a sudden, I notice my hand reach for my desk, and I pull out my wallet, and I'm now in single file with everybody. I realize, oh my goodness, I'm becoming a zombie. Once you are bitten, you will become infected, and you've got to fight it as a leader. Some cultures are based on the charismatic personality of one dominant leader, sometimes the founder of a company, a very charismatic CEO. And if that person is a good person, they can create an unbelievable culture. But if that person's a bully, a dictator, a very different place. In either case, the real challenge today is there's too much leadership on one person, and if something happens to that person, the company's at risk because they don't build enough strong leaders underneath that individual. And then the other culture is one like this racetrack. Imagine every department in the company representing a horse with the blinders on. Sales, marketing, operations, manufacturing, R&D, corporate, legal, HR. And everyone's racing to a finish line, but they're actually competing against each other internally. It's a hyper-competitive environment with low trust and low support. And it's hard on people over the long term. So what our clients say to us, we need to build a strong leadership culture, and our research shows this is how they define it. These 10 characteristics. First, leaders are clear on the strategy. 2, they're excited about the company and its future. 3, they share a common aspiration to be great as leaders. 4, they show up with a one company mindset, right? Always thinking about what's best for the company as a whole. 5, they have the courage to give each other feedback. So if Vince is not performing well, you're going to come to me and say, Vince, you need to be better. We need you to be better. And you have the courage to do that, and I accept that in a positive way. We celebrate success. We break down silos so we can collaborate effectively. We keep office politics to the background. We demonstrate resilience, right, in times of adversity. And last, we support each other. We have each other's backs. We are together. And what's really interesting about this last one, I have looked at a lot of the employee engagement research in Brazil, and a lot of Brazilian employees want this last one in the cultures that they work with. They want that sense of trust, support, because that's what drives their engagement. So do you feel supported? Are you in an environment that allows you to be your best? Because if I were to say to you, describe for me the leadership culture that would enable you to be at your best as a leader, I can tell you, because I've asked this question around the world, no one ever says, Vince, surround me with a group of zombies and watch me excel. We never say that. or put me in a very conflict-based environment where every day's a fight and I don't know who to trust. We never say that. What do we say? We say these things. Clear on strategy, high aspiration to be great, mutual support, accountability to one another. It's like these are hardwired in us as human beings. So, who's supporting you? Because we rely on one another now, more than ever, to be successful. So how do you take these ideas and apply them in your own leadership role? Well, in the book I talk about there's things you need to do as a leader individually, and there are things that we need to do organizationally. And for today, I just want to focus on this individually. So these questions that I've asked you throughout the presentation, I want you to think about them now. So I'm going to ask for the lights to come back up, and I'm going to have you just talk to your colleague about these 4 terms and reflect on which for you do you feel is strong right now, and which is the one that you feel you have to pay more attention to in order to become a more accountable leader. And I'm going to give you a little extra time for this discussion because I want to make sure you walk away with a clear point of focus to take these ideas in your own leadership role. Okay? So go back to your partner, a couple of minutes, and then we'll close it off. Over to you. Okay, begin to wind down the discussion. So let's recap and bring this to a close. As you've been exploring in this conference about the need to really innovate, to inspire, and to evolve, I believe a big part of that in leadership is thinking about how accountable am I being in my role? Because it's a question we have to really have a good answer to, because a lot is expected of us. Whether you're here as a frontline manager, a middle manager, a senior executive, a CEO or CFO, it doesn't matter. The expectations of all of us as leaders is greater than it's ever been. And over the next 5, 10, 15 years, the demands and expectations will be ever greater. And I believe, as we've seen in our research, the companies and the leaders who really pay attention to leadership accountability are the ones that are going to win. Because there's a connection between accountability, leadership, and company performance. And so as you think about leaving this conference, I'd like you to be thinking about, how am I going to be accountable? How am I going to show up and make this decision to be the leader? How will I be clear on my obligations? And how do I do a better job of tackling some of the hard work that might be holding me back, holding my company back, making us weaker? And finally, how am I the leader who can build relationships with my colleagues? Because if you're the leader who's made the decision to lead, you will inspire people. I want to work with a leader who's fully committed. If you are clear on your obligation, I want to work with you because I know you're not being selfish. I know you're trying to lead to benefit others. If you're the leader who's going to has the courage to tackle the hard work, I want to support you because you're going to make my life easier. And if you're the leader that builds community and builds a strong leadership culture, that's where I want to be, because I know that's where I'll be at my best. So I want to thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for the ability to have conversations. And I believe now we'll open it up to some questions and answers. Thank you, everyone, and wish you all the best in your roles. Thank you.
Ópera apresenta ExpoGestão.